In the small town of Maple Creek, where the hills wore morning mist and the air often carried the scent of fresh dough, lived a young woman named Claire Dawson. Every morning, before the sun had a chance to rise, Claire stood before the oven of a modest bakery on Main Street, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, and eyes heavy with quiet strength. She was 26, once part of a life that revolved around her family's small patch of farmland. But everything changed when her father fell gravely ill. The family's land, once their pride, had to be sold to cover medical bills. Since then, her mother had grown weary, and Claire took on the weight of it all with flour-stained hands and a heart that never rested. Though her days were a repetition, wake early, knead dough, serve customers, return to a weathered wooden house, Claire never once complained. Yet deep in her eyes was something restless, as if some part of her longed for something beyond bread loaves and windless afternoons. Claire wasn't one to dream, but each time she wiped her hands on her apron and looked out at the fields behind the bakery, her heart quietly asked, could life be something more than this? Late afternoon painted Maple Creek in a faded hue, the kind of light that felt like a farewell. Claire was tidying up the front of the bakery when Mrs. Henderson's voice called her from the kitchen. Claire, can I see you for a moment? Her tone wasn't its usual soft lilt. There was something hesitant, weighty. Claire wiped her hands on her apron and stepped into the back, where the smell of butter and vanilla still lingered in the warm air. Mrs. Henderson stood near the counter, eyes unreadable. My niece, Emily. She's working as an assistant in San Francisco. The family she works for, they're looking for someone to live in, help with the house, cook, clean, and keep an eye on their son, she said. Then more quietly, they pay well. Room and board are included. Claire froze, flour still on her fingers. The words sounded foreign, unreal, like they belonged to a life that didn't touch the small-town kitchens or flour-dusted aprons or the rickety path from her home to the bakery. I don't understand, Claire murmured. I thought of you right away, Mrs. Henderson said, her voice now gentle. You're dedicated, kind. If anyone deserves a chance to have more, it's you. Claire bit her lip. Her heart didn't race. It sank. This wasn't excitement, but something quieter, heavier. The ache of letting go, of leaving behind everything familiar. Maple Creek wasn't grand, but it was everything. It was the wooden house where her father now lay by the window. It was the kitchen table where her mother brewed tea every night, despite being too tired to speak. It was the field where she once chased fireflies and dreamed of being the best baker in town. To leave meant stepping into a world she didn't know. But to stay meant watching her family sink further into struggle, with no lifeline in sight. I'll go, Claire said softly, her voice cracking like the crust of a warm loaf. Mrs. Henderson's eyes glimmered with both sorrow and pride. 2 days later, Claire boarded a bus before sunrise. Through the fogged window, she watched her town fade. The golden wheat fields, the stone well, the creaky old market, the roof of Mr. Wilkins' house where she once bought cookies every Sunday. Her suitcase was small, just a few clothes, a worn book from her mother, and a heart full of fear and fragile hope. But what weighed the most couldn't be packed. It was the piece of her soul that clung to this town. The smell of rising dough, the quiet routines, the ache of goodbyes unspoken. She turned once more to look at Maple Creek, at everything she had ever known, loved and lost, and closed her eyes. If the road ahead meant saving what mattered most, then she would follow it, even if her heart had to stay behind. The bus ride stretched nearly 30 hours, winding through unfamiliar towns, across mountains and valleys, until the world Claire knew began to fade. Wheat fields turned into freeways. Dirt roads disappeared into endless pavement. The small, weathered bakery, the creaky front porch, the scent of rising bread. Everything she left behind felt like a memory from another life. When the bus rolled into Pacific Heights, San Francisco's most pristine neighborhood, Claire felt her breath catch. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Homes stood like modern castles, behind automatic gates and flowering hedges sculpted to perfection. The air smelled faintly of roses and wealth. Waiting at the stop was Emily, Mrs. Henderson's niece. She wore a silk dress, sunglasses, and heels that clicked against the sidewalk like punctuation. Her voice was fast, polished, and hard to keep up with. "You'll be fine," she said, giving Claire's worn suitcase a glance. "The Blakes are old money. All you have to do is keep things tidy and look after their only son. Nothing major." Claire followed her through a set of towering iron gates that opened with a soft mechanical hum. The estate looked like a painting, 3 stories of pale stone, framed by columns with a fountain gurgling at the center of a circular driveway. Birds chirped sweetly, and Claire realized the sound came from hidden speakers in the hedges. A butler in crisp uniform greeted them at the door. "Welcome, miss," he said smoothly, ushering them inside. The interior was breathtaking. Arched hallways, grand staircases, chandeliers dripping with crystal light. Claire barely had time to process it all before the clicking of heels echoed from the staircase. A woman appeared, poised and commanding. Her brown hair was curled just so, her dress tailored to perfection, her gaze sharp and unreadable. "I'm Mrs. Blake," she said. "You must be Claire Dawson?" "Yes, ma'am," Claire replied, clutching the strap of her bag tightly. "The job is simple," Mrs. Blake said crisply. "Keep the house clean, laundry done. Most importantly, keep an eye on my son." "Your son?" Claire echoed, imagining a difficult teenager or spoiled little boy. Then came the sound of boots, not light steps, but confident, dragging footsteps. A young man walked in, tall, mid-20s, with messy hair, a leather jacket, and a smirk that oozed trouble. He looked Claire up and down like she was a curiosity in a museum. "This the new maid?" he drawled. "Wow, did she get lost on her way back to the 1950s? "Julian," Mrs. Blake warned sharply. He ignored her. "Sorry, it's just... she's got that vintage small-town charm. Cute, in an old-school way." Then he turned to Claire with a lazy smile. "I'm Julian Blake. Can't wait to mildly annoy you for the foreseeable future." Claire's body stiffened. She had braced herself for unfamiliarity, for a hard adjustment, but not for this kind of welcome. Every ounce of pride, every shred of courage she'd built on the ride there, crumbled beneath that smirk. She almost turned around, but her father's sunken face came to mind, her mother counting pills in the dim kitchen light. Claire lifted her chin. Her voice didn't tremble. "Yes, I'm the maid," she said, steady and clear. "And I'm here to work. I start today." The first few days at the Blake estate were a test of Claire's patience, not just because the house was vast and unfamiliar, but because Julian Blake was chaos with a grin. He was lazy, smug, and seemed to thrive on being impossible. Claire would finish mopping the floor, only for Julian to walk through with muddy boots. She'd finish folding napkins and setting the table, and he'd spill orange juice across it minutes later. "Relax, country maid," he'd say with that infuriating smirk. "You're not my mom." "You're right," Claire shot back, arms crossed. "I'm not your mom. I'm the person hired to keep you out of trouble, and I take that seriously." Every morning, Claire was up by 6, cleaning, sorting laundry, making breakfast. Julian usually appeared around noon, flopping onto the couch with leftover pizza and reruns of shows that made her want to scream. She stuck to her schedule. He seemed determined to disrupt it. One morning, after she had just polished the floor to a perfect shine, Julian strolled in with a heap of dirty clothes and dropped them right in the middle of the living room. No apology, no glance. Just plop. Claire stared at the spreading stain like it was a personal insult. Something inside her snapped. She grabbed the broom and stormed toward him. "Are you brain dead?" I just cleaned that floor." To her surprise, Julian didn't get angry. He laughed like a little kid. "Oh no," he grinned, backing away. "The country maid knows how to swing a broom." Terrifying. Claire chased him around the dining table. He darted and dodged, the two of them spinning in circles, yelling like children. The echo of their voices filled the high-ceiling room, chaos crashing against marble walls. And then it happened. Claire tripped over the leg of a chair, stumbling forward. Julian caught her. Their eyes locked. Time didn't stop, but it did something close. And in the space of a heartbeat, their lips brushed. The kiss wasn't long. Claire immediately pulled back, cheeks flaming. Julian stood frozen, stunned. Silence fell between them like heavy drapery. Without a word, Claire turned and walked away, so fast she nearly dropped the broom. That night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling. "It was an accident," she whispered to herself. "Just an accident." But her heart refused to agree. After that unexpected kiss, neither of them spoke about what had happened. No apologies, no glances exchanged, but something, unspoken and weightless, had shifted. Julian wasn't quite the same. One morning, Claire walked into the kitchen and froze at the sight before her. Julian standing over the stove, wearing her apron, her pink apron, the one with tiny red hearts she kept hidden out of sheer embarrassment. "Good morning, alligator," he grinned, flipping eggs like it was something he did every day. What?" Claire blinked. "Alligator, that's your nickname when you're mad. You're terrifying, like one snapping its jaws." Claire narrowed her eyes but couldn't help the smile tugging at her lips. From that morning on, Julian started showing up in the spaces she never expected him to. He folded napkins into heart shapes, sloppy but sweet, hung clothes on the line instead of leaving them in a heap. Once, she caught him secretly Googling how to clean glass without streaks. Claire didn't say much. She watched quietly, as if watching a film where she wasn't sure if the ending was happy or tragic. She didn't trust it easily. Julian was still Julian, the same man who once called her a country maid, the same man who treated her like a joke. But now, his eyes were different. No longer mocking, but something softer, something real. Her heart betrayed her. It quickened when Julian stood too close. It fluttered when their hands brushed. It warmed when he smiled. Not with arrogance, but with something almost shy. And yet the sound of his roaring motorcycle or the laughter of his high society friends snapped her back to reality. Julian came from a world with no room for flour-stained aprons and worn-down boots. "Don't be foolish, Claire," she told herself. "Don't fall for something that was never meant to be yours." So she kept smiling, kept dodging, kept pretending. But inside, something had already started to grow, quietly, uncontrollably. One night, as the breeze from the bay carried in the scent of salt and the distant hum of the city, Julian sat on the balcony railing, legs swinging, eyes lost in the horizon. Claire was cleaning in the kitchen when he spoke. Not loud, not soft, just enough to stop her breath. "What if I said I was serious?" Claire froze. She didn't turn around. Her heart ached, but her mind screamed louder. This kind of love, if it broke, would shatter her completely. She just stood there, letting the hum of the fridge and the pounding of her heart fill the silence between them. Julian didn't say anything more, but his eyes, when they briefly met hers through the kitchen doorway, held no sarcasm, no smugness. Just something real, something painfully vulnerable. And that terrified her more than all the teasing ever had. She couldn't dream, couldn't gamble her heart on someone who belonged to a world she'd never truly be part of. Love was a luxury, and she was a girl fighting for survival, one paycheck, one broken night at a time. The next morning, before anyone woke, Claire left the Blake estate. No note, no explanation, just her pink apron, quietly hung on the kitchen hook, the same way she had arrived. quietly, unnoticed. Julian realized she was gone not long after. At first he was confused, then angry, and finally, silent. A silence so heavy that even loud music and golden chandeliers couldn't fill it. Claire didn't look back, but every step away from that house tore something inside her. No one cried, no one begged, but inside her it felt like something precious had unraveled quietly, leaving behind nothing but the soft, aching echo of what might have been. Julian had no map, no plan, just a single name, Maple Creek, and a hollow ache he couldn't shake. He was used to luxury, to glittering lights and parties that never truly ended. But after Claire left, the Blake estate became a shell. No more soft scolding in the morning, no pink apron hanging by the stove, no eggs made with quiet care. And he knew he couldn't stay another day. He packed a few clothes, slammed the trunk of his sports car, and drove. Hours blurred into states, no GPS, no music, just highway and memory. When people at gas stations noticed the California plates and asked what he was looking for, he simply said, "Someone I let slip away." By the time he reached Maple Creek, the sun had risen high. The town greeted him not with grandeur, but with stillness, and the warm scent of fresh bread floating on the wind. He found the bakery easily. The worn wooden sign, the lace curtains, the small bouquet of wildflowers on each table. It was all unmistakably Claire. He chose a quiet booth in the corner and waited. She walked in minutes later. Claire, hair loosely tied, hands dusted in flour, the same old apron. Her eyes swept the room and then stopped. Their gazes met. No greetings, no accusations, just a flood of unspoken emotion filling the space between them. Her hands froze midair, a dish towel still in her grasp. She nearly dropped it. Her voice came out broken, unsure. "What are you doing here?" "I came to make things right," Julian replied softly. "I came to find the one person who believed I could be more." Claire didn't answer, but her eyes searched his face, not for charm, but for truth. The next morning, Julian returned. "Do you need help around here?" he asked Mrs. Henderson. "I can sweep floors, carry trays, whatever you need." She nearly dropped her coffee pot, but she smiled. And just like that, Julian became the bakery's newest, most chaotic assistant. He spilled drinks, forgot orders, broke a tray of freshly baked loaves. But he apologized, cleaned up, and never once walked away. Claire watched it all. From the kitchen, she heard him laugh awkwardly with customers, ask where the extra rags were, and mutter, "Why do these towels keep disappearing?" But Julian didn't stop at the bakery. In the afternoons, he showed up at Claire's house, at first just to stack firewood. Then he fixed a leaking pipe, raked the leaves, helped Claire's mom carry groceries. When he saw Claire's father, Mr. Dawson, sitting quietly alone, Julian wheeled him out to the porch, made tea, and listened to stories about harvests long gone. One day he cooked soup using a wrinkled recipe Claire's mother had tucked into an old cookbook. Claire noticed everything. She saw him with mud on his designer shoes, sweat soaking through his shirt, dirt under his fingernails, and in those moments, he was no longer the spoiled city boy she had once met. One afternoon, as they carried a sack of flour into the kitchen together, Claire paused. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked quietly. Julian looked straight at her. "Because I've never taken anything seriously in my life," he said, "until I met you." She didn't respond, but this time, she believed him. Maple Creek hadn't changed. The dusty roads, the old corner store, the comforting scent of warm dough drifting through the air. It was all still there. But the one thing that was different, undeniably different, was Julian. Not the Julian from the city, but someone new, quieter, simpler, real. He worked slowly but with patience, washing every glass, wiping every table. Once he accidentally spilled strawberry jam on Mrs. Haggerty, the town's most notorious grump. Julian bowed deeply, apologized twice, and gave her a fresh loaf of bread that Claire had secretly baked to smooth things over. He learned to fold napkins into little stars, learned to split wood without breaking the axe handle, learned to make a simple breakfast of eggs and green onions, just the way Claire had made it for him back in the city. He didn't speak as much anymore. No teasing remarks, no smug grins. Instead, there was warmth in his eyes and quiet in his gestures. Every afternoon, Claire would find him sitting on the bakery steps, shoes dusty, hands gripping an old cleaning rag. One day she brought him a glass of lemonade. He accepted it silently, then looked at her with a soft smile and a hint of shyness in his eyes. Claire felt herself softening, slowly. What grew between them wasn't wildfire. It wasn't a storm. It was a quiet current, gentle as breath, steady as falling leaves, constant as the smell of flower in late afternoons. They began to understand each other without saying much. Julian knew Claire liked silence in the mornings, so he brewed coffee and left it on the windowsill. Claire knew he often had trouble sleeping on full moon nights, so she left a small porch light on and a cup of cold mint tea by the door each morning. The town slowly adjusted to the sight of them together. No hand-holding, no public declarations, just glances that spoke volumes, footsteps that fell in rhythm. One day, as Claire was wiping down the counter, Mrs. Henderson leaned over and said quietly, "That boy, he's really changed." Claire didn't reply, but her eyes softened as if the words had reached somewhere deep inside her. Because she knew. This love didn't need to be labeled. It was already there, in the nods, in the silences, in the smallest acts. And sometimes love doesn't arrive with thunder. It arrives like sunset, quiet, golden, and impossible to ignore. One crisp autumn morning, Julian woke Claire with an unusual question. "Did you bring your white dress?" Claire blinked, still half asleep. "White dress? Why?" Julian just smiled. "Come with me. I have something to show you." They left Maple Creek before the sun had fully risen. The car moved westward, past golden hills bathed in light, along quiet country roads. Claire didn't ask where they were going. She didn't need to. For the first time, she felt safe, even in the unknown, just by being beside him. By late afternoon, they arrived at the Santa Barbara coast. The waves kissed the shore gently, and the water shimmered with hues of amber and rose. Claire stepped out of the car, the sea breeze tossing her hair. Julian said nothing. He simply walked behind her and knelt. "Claire Dawson," he said, voice low and steady. She turned and froze. He held out a ring. It was simple. No diamonds, no drama. But it glimmered in the sunset like everything honest between them. "I never knew I could be serious about anything," he said, "until you came into my life like a storm, soft, but strong enough to change me. Let me be the man who earns your forever, because you've already changed mine." Claire laughed through her tears, no hesitation. "Yes," she whispered, "1,000 times yes." When Julian rose, he pulled her into his arms, the sky melting around them, waves whispering at their feet. No chandeliers, no applause. Just two hearts, one promise, and a love that needed no audience to last forever. Julian had once imagined that if he ever got married, it would happen in a grand hotel, beneath glimmering chandeliers and the echo of classical music through towering ceilings. But as he stood next to Claire on a soft October afternoon, he knew there was only one place truly worthy of beginning their life together. And it wasn't in the city. It was here, behind her childhood home, in the field where their love had grown from flower, firewood, and quiet glances. Their wedding was as simple as it was unforgettable. There were no designer dresses, no velvet chairs, no crystal centerpieces. Claire wore a white dress lovingly sewn by her mother, Each stitch a memory, a blessing, a quiet promise. In her hands was not a bouquet of imported roses, but a humble bundle of lavender, symbolizing grace, strength, and the steady kind of love that they had nurtured since the very first awkward breakfast. Julian stood at the end of the aisle, wearing a simple suit. He couldn't take his eyes off Claire, not just because she looked beautiful, but because she was everything he had ever needed. There was gratitude in his gaze, reverence, joy, and a kind of quiet awe reserved for someone who knows they're witnessing a miracle. Mr. Dawson sat proudly at the front, his old wheelchair nestled in the grass. Claire's mother rested her hand gently on his shoulder, her eyes never leaving their daughter. She had watched Claire carry this family through impossible times, and now she was watching her step into something new. Not alone, but with someone who had chosen to stay. Her gaze shimmered, though she didn't cry. She didn't need to. Her pride was written in every line of her face. On the opposite side, Mrs. Blake sat watching the son she once feared would never change. She had doubted this girl, this small-town baker with flour on her cheek and no pedigree to speak of. But now Julian stood tall, grounded, whole. And when he reached for Claire's hand, Mrs. Blake let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her smile was small, but it was real. No one checked their phones that day. No one looked at their watches. Neighbors brought home-cooked dishes, pumpkin pies, grilled ribs, jugs of apple cider. Mrs. Henderson, who had once given Claire the job that changed everything, arrived carrying a homemade wedding cake, 3 tiers of buttercream and dried herbs, decorated with fresh lavender from Claire's own garden. When the pastor asked, "Do you promise to love her for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, for the rest of your life?" Julian didn't pause. "I used to live without knowing who I was," he said, voice steady but thick with emotion. "But from the day Claire walked into my life, I've known exactly the man I want to become." Claire cried then, openly, freely. She clutched his hand, the same hand that had once felt distant and unsure. Now it felt like home. Applause followed. Laughter. Music played softly from an old speaker beneath a tree. Children danced barefoot on the grass, and someone passed around slices of warm pie. Everything smelled of sugar and earth. And in that golden light, in the breeze that carried the scent of fresh bread, in the softness of familiar faces smiling around them, a love that had grown quietly, patiently, through the most ordinary days, bloomed fully, not with grandeur, not with spectacle, but with truth. And that was more than enough for forever. After the wedding, life didn't change like a fairy tale. There was no carriage, no castle, no luxurious honeymoon, just a quiet morning, the first as husband and wife, with Claire and Julian sitting on the front steps, cradling steaming mugs of coffee, watching the sun rise over the cornfields. Julian never returned to San Francisco. He didn't need to. He chose Maple Creek, not because Claire asked him to, but because he wanted it. He wanted to wake early to light the stove, to knead dough beside Claire, to hear the wind chimes on their porch each evening. Claire had feared he'd grow tired of the stillness, but he didn't. He learned to love the quiet, the sound of flour hitting a mixing bowl, the scent of coffee drifting through the kitchen, the soft laugh Claire gave every time he spilled flour for the 10th time that week. They didn't need much, just each other in the little things. Afternoon walks through the fields, evenings reading beneath a golden lamp, the silence of shared moments, the warmth of an embrace after a long day. One evening, sitting together on the porch, Claire leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, "I used to think you'd leave, that this was just a moment, but you stayed. You're really here." Julian tightened his hand around hers, smiling. "I used to think I had to go far to find what mattered," he said, "but it turns out it was you, and all the simple things you brought with you. Above them, The sunset cast golden light across the rooftops of their small town. And in that moment, Claire understood. Home isn't where we're born, it's where we choose to stay. And sometimes it's just one person who knows how to hold your hand and never let go. Life after the wedding moved slowly, softly, just like the love that had brought them together in the first place. No glitter, no rush, but every moment felt full and real. And then, one spring morning, when the wind was still crisp in the trees and sunlight kissed the grass behind the porch, Claire told Julian they were going to be parents. Julian went quiet, staring at her as if trying to decide whether it was a dream. Then he laughed, a laugh that burst open like morning light, pure, unfiltered, overflowing with joy. He pulled her into his arms and held her tight, for so long that Claire didn't need a single word to know. He was ready. Days passed in a rhythm of new anticipation. Julian read parenting books every night, scribbled baby room sketches onto the backs of Claire's bakery order forms. Claire kept baking, her belly rounding a little more each week, carrying a joy too deep to be explained. And when their daughter arrived with eyes clear as sunrise and hair soft as breath, their world didn't just change, it became whole. Julian wasn't perfect. He fumbled with diapers, hesitated every time he held the baby, unsure where to place his hands. But Claire showed him gently, with patience and the kind of love that never rushed. The little wooden house now carried more than the scent of warm bread. It rang with laughter, midnight cries, and Julian's terribly off-key lullabies hummed from the nursery at 2 a.m. Every morning, the three of them sat by the window, where sunlight spilled through sheer curtains and danced over tiny handprints on the table. One day, Claire, holding their baby girl close, leaned her head on Julian's shoulder and whispered, "Did you ever imagine we'd be this happy?" Julian looked at the two loves of his life, eyes full and still. "No," he said softly, "but you taught me some things don't need to be dreamed to become real." They needed nothing else, not perfection, not plans, just each other, and now one more little heartbeat to love together. Maple Creek stayed the same, small, quiet, familiar. But each day in that little home felt new because their daughter's laughter echoed through the walls, pulling their hearts with it. And in those ordinary moments, when Claire folded baby clothes, when Julian clumsily baked cookies from his own messy recipe, when they cleaned toys from the floor between soft babbles, they both knew. Love isn't just how a story begins. And in the whispers of rising dough and a baby's giggle echoing down the hallway, they found their forever, growing day by day.